Here to talk about that subject and what is transpiring in Ferguson, two people who bring passions and convictions to this discussion. Skyping in from Washington, D.C., Democratic political strategist Joe Lestingi, and from Nashville, Tennessee, Scottie Nell Hughes, the news director of the Tea Party Network. Joe, to you first. Sending Attorney General Holder, we know that the Justice Department has, in essence, federalized this case. But with the Attorney General going in there, does it endanger more of the specter of race getting involved here? After all, the Attorney General called basically Americans cowards about race questions when he first took that job in February of 2009.
I think this situation is much more serious than something with that type of explanation. I mean, there's nothing good going on in Ferguson right now, and I think the number one goal for both the local government and the federal government is to stop the violence, stop the riots. No one is right here, and that's the hard pill for everyone to swallow. The police weren't right in shooting an unarmed man, and the rioters certainly aren't right by continuing to have violent protests, and the police response is equally as dangerous. So right now, I think the best thing is to get as much transparency in Ferguson as possible. And I think by sending the Attorney General there to talk about civil rights investigations, which is the only thing the federal government can really do here, is the right move, as well as working with the governor and working with the local officials. But in the end, it's the local leaders, the local community leaders, who have to get together with the local elected officials and solve this problem.
Scottie Nell, it's interesting. The political spectrum isn't so much linear as it is circular, and there are some questions where the right and the left meet. Included there, the whole notion of the militarization of the police, the ACLU lining up with Rand Paul on this question. So, Scottie, what about the demilitarization of police, or do police need the kind of weaponry we saw earlier in Ferguson, Missouri, to deal with contingencies on the ground in case things get out of hand?
Listen, the Ferguson debate has made some very strange bedfellows. There is no doubt about that one. When you have the ACLU and Rand Paul sitting there and agreeing on something, you have to wonder what exactly is going on here. You know, on one hand, you're right. The last thing we want to see is tanks running through American streets. But on the other hand, you know, what are we supposed to do? The majority of these tanks, the majority of this equipment, and let's just point out, the majority of things that the military donated to local police departments were things like night gear, night vision goggles, were things that had nothing to do with tanks, nothing to do with actual guns, but other types of equipment. You know, the tanks and the guns were just a very small percentage of what the military gave. And darned if they do, because if we remember, just about 2 years ago, there was a huge pork study that was released that we had left all of this equipment over in Afghanistan, over in Iraq, just to basically sit out there and either rot or basically be stolen and be used by our enemies against ourselves. So what are we supposed to do with this equipment? So on one hand, I want to commend our government for coming back and saying, you know what, let's give it to these local police departments, because guess what, guys? We don't want our taxes raised locally. We're complaining about it, and these local police departments are having to sit there and makeshift and use equipment from 20 years ago. On the other hand, I do have to say I wish this stuff would have gone to the National Guard first, because they are hurting. And if you look at it, you know, just a couple of days ago when Captain Johnson did pull back the use of these military vehicles, guess what happened? The looters went even more crazy, and now we have even more violence, and we have stores being shot out, we have businesses being destroyed. So it calls the question, maybe we did need tanks in the streets in this case.
Well, Governor Nixon was on Face the Nation on Sunday discussing the release of a security video where a young man matching the description of Mr. Brown is seen robbing a convenience store. Let's take a listen to what Governor Nixon had to say on CBS News and Face the Nation.
And I think it had an incendiary effect. I mean, when you release pictures and you clearly are attempting to besmirch a victim of a shooting, shot down a young man in his own street, and at the same time you're releasing information to try to make it to tarnish him, then properly. There was a lot of folks that were concerned about that.
So that's Democratic Governor Jay Nixon of Missouri. Meantime, Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill, Missouri senior senator, was on MSNBC's Morning Joe addressing the situation. Let's listen to what she had to say, then I'd like you both to react.
This isn't a community that had a high crime rate before this incident. In fact, many of the other surrounding communities in the area had higher crime rates than Ferguson. So the protesters have now been invaded, and embedded among them are a group of instigators, some coming from other states, that want a confrontation with the police. And if I were going to criticize the media in terms of some of its coverage, America hasn't heard enough about the people who have been shot, about the man who died after being shot Friday night.
Interesting points made by both those elected officials. Joe, we had a situation where Governor Nixon was again casting aspersions on the police and the release of that security video. Is that a wise position for the governor to take nationally?
Well, whether or not it's wise is kind of irrelevant because it's the right position for him to take. And if it costs him politically, then it will. But I have hope, I guess, that the right side of this will prevail. Releasing that video was incendiary. There is no proof that was the young man. He was not tried in a court of law. He is being tried in a court of public opinion, and he's not even alive to defend himself. The focus of this needs to be on the fact that an unarmed man was shot by police, and that is where the discussion needs to start. His actions prior to that, and unless he had threatened someone with a gun, which was clear that even if this was him, that was not the case. I mean, it's a bad situation, and like I said before, no one is in the right here. And the number one goal of the governor appears to be, listen, we need to calm these tensions down so that we can communicate, because that's the only way this is going to get solved.
Scottie Nell, you heard from both Claire McCaskill and Jay Nixon. Your take on what they had to say.
Well, it's the exact same reason why Eric Holder is going in. The last thing that these guys want to do is calm things down. They are enjoying it. If anything, they're inciting this even more, which is very, very sad, to be honest with you. You know, to sit there and criticize releasing this video, showing why police might have had the mentality and why the officer might have pulled him over or might have gotten out in the first place. I mean, to be honest with you, we have not heard the truth yet consistently as to what happened. They're sitting here relying on eyewitness facts that were coming out to not be true. They're saying, oh, you know, that he was executed, when in fact all the shots were in the front. We're finding out that there was marijuana in Michael Brown's system, so that makes you question actually how he was acting. And not to mention, this guy was called Big Mike. He was 6'4". What's the size of the officer? So for anybody that's sitting here and criticizing this video being released, I hope you're also criticizing the fact that these guys were forced to put this officer in danger, and were forced basically in the public eye to release the officer's name, who's now basically being tarred and feathered in public streets right now, and whose life is truly in danger, and that was not necessary either. So if you're going to criticize the video of the convenience store of a guy that, you know what, honestly, I think majority of people consider that to be Big Mike, I think you also then have to criticize, why did we have to release the officer's name?
Scottie, now that's just dangerous rhetoric. I'm sorry, but no one has proven that is him, and that is not a fair criticism. The man was shot multiple times. This was not twice in
the front, okay? 4 in his arm, 4 in his arm.
Expect police officers to exercise restraint to maintain order. That is their job. They are also allowed to protect themselves. But the truth is that none of this can come out. None of the truth can come out until the riots stop, until the situation is calmed down. And I believe the governor and Senator McCaskill, want to do that. Otherwise, this violence continues. No one is winning in this situation right now. The national figures have thrown gasoline on this, and they just need to let the local officials work this out.
We will have to leave it.
Obama sent Eric Holder is exactly the reason that's making it incendiary.
There's a civil rights lawsuit. They have to have someone.
It's not a federal issue. You said it yourself. Let the state and local officials handle it.
We'll have to leave it right there. Thank you both. To the poll question we have for you at home: is Rand Paul right? Are the Ferguson police over-militarized? Why don't you vote in this poll? You do so by going to newsmax.com/poll. We're coming right back.